The discovery of 40 firearms in the luxurious estate of Mamkais shook South Africa to its core. It wasn't merely the number that caught the public's attention, but the allegation that these weapons belonged to Kat Matlala, a figure already notorious in tabloids and social media for links to organized crime, mysterious disappearances, and violent incidents that had plagued the nation's headlines for years. The revelation raised a flurry of questions. Why were so many guns stored in the house of a prominent business figure? How did Kat Matlala acquire them? And most urgently, what were they intended for? Authorities first stumbled upon the cache during a raid dubbed Operation Kwanatsi, a carefully planned law enforcement initiative targeting illegal arms networks across Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. According to internal police documents and later media reports, intelligence had been building for months. Investigators had traced several suspicious transactions and communications, pointing to Mamkai's estate as a potential arms depot. But nothing could have prepared them for the sheer scale of the discovery. 40 firearms, neatly stacked, some loaded, some in custom cases, were found hidden behind false walls and secret compartments. The initial press coverage described the scene as surreal. Investigators moved cautiously, photographing each weapon, logging serial numbers, and noting modifications that suggested they were not simply collector's items. Some guns were illegally modified for rapid fire. Others were unregistered and traced to previous criminal investigations. It quickly became clear, this was not a casual stockpile. This was a network waiting to be activated. The connection to Kat Matlala sent ripples of fear and fascination. Known for a history of violent incidents and alleged involvement in politically charged operations, Matlala's name added a layer of intrigue. Social media erupted with speculation. Was this arsenal meant for criminal operations? Political intimidation? Revenge killings? Analysts in the newsrooms debated whether the guns were evidence of a broader conspiracy or the tip of an iceberg that law enforcement had only begun to uncover. Mamkais, a prominent businessman with substantial social influence, became a person of interest in a story that was no longer just about firearms. Investigators began to explore whether the property was being used as a safe house or logistical hub for organized crime. For the public, the spectacle of someone so visible and connected allegedly harboring a stockpile of deadly weapons added a sense of betrayal. It was not simply a legal issue, it was a cultural shock, a reminder that violence can hide behind wealth, influence, and charm. The operational details of Operation Kwanatsi were kept under tight wraps, but leaks to journalists revealed the meticulous planning behind the raid. Police units had monitored the estate for weeks, tracking movements in and out, observing patterns, and confirming intelligence that suggested the firearms were not for recreational use. Yet, even with the preparation, the magnitude of the cache surpassed expectations, leading some officers to describe the raid as a turning point in the fight against illegal arms in South Africa. When questioned in media briefings, authorities were careful to avoid speculation about motives. Instead, they emphasized that each weapon would be traced, documented, and tested for links to prior crimes. However, in the corridors of public discourse, it was impossible to separate the facts from the drama. Every social media post, every rumor, fueled the narrative that Matlala was not just a criminal, but a figure capable of orchestrating large-scale violence from behind the veil of legitimacy. Political analysts also weighed in, noting that the timing of the raid was curious. Mamkais had recently hosted high-profile gatherings, attended by prominent figures across business and government. Some critics suggested that the exposure of these weapons was not coincidental, that it might serve as a warning to other powerful individuals who trafficked in illicit arms or wielded influence through fear. Whether intended or not, the narrative quickly became intertwined with national politics, raising suspicions that the implications of the raid could extend far beyond the immediate seizure. Forensic experts tasked with cataloging the firearms discovered anomalies. Serial numbers were scratched. Traces of recent modifications suggested that some weapons were tested in live fire, and several had been reported stolen from previous cases. The immediate concern was safety. Securing and transporting 40 firearms, some in operable condition, posed immense logistical challenges. But beyond the logistics lay the bigger question. What crimes were these weapons connected to? As the story unfolded, Matlala's public image began to crumble. Once portrayed in certain media circles as a controversial but untouchable figure, he was now tied directly to one of the largest illegal arms discoveries in recent memory. His social media presence went silent, and legal teams scrambled to issue statements denying knowledge of the weapons, claiming ownership was either fabricated or misattributed. The public, however, remained skeptical. With each new leak, each analyst's commentary, the narrative hardened: a powerful man, a secret arsenal, a nation on edge. Local journalists described the discovery as a bombshell for both law enforcement and the broader society. Not only did it reveal the audacity of criminal networks embedded in high society, but it also highlighted the difficulty of enforcing the law when wealth, influence, and intimidation are intertwined. The raid was covered extensively, yet no one could predict the consequences. Would Matlala face immediate prosecution? Could the firearms be linked to ongoing criminal investigations? Or would they vanish quietly into another scandal, leaving the public frustrated and afraid? As Block 1 closes, the magnitude of Operation Quanatsi becomes clear. 40 firearms, meticulously hidden, allegedly owned by Kat Matlala, are no longer just a statistic. They are a symbol of a broader problem. The intersection of power, violence, and secrecy has never been more visible. The story is only beginning, and already, the questions echo in every newsroom, every street, and every social feed. Who truly controls the weapons? Who will face justice? And how deep does the web of crime and influence extend? Following the initial shock of the discovery, investigators turned their full attention to the question that haunted both law enforcement and the public alike. How had Kat Matlala amassed 40 firearms without detection? The scale of the arsenal suggested more than personal collection. It hinted at an organized network with connections that could span provinces, maybe even borders. Analysts speculated that these weapons were not for display but for coordinated activity, and the implications were chilling. For weeks, intelligence officers traced communication patterns, financial transactions, and travel logs connected to Matlala. Every lead pointed toward a sophisticated operation designed to remain under the radar. Sources indicated that Matlala had employed intermediaries to acquire weapons legally, then transported them to Mamkai's estate, where hidden compartments and reinforced walls allowed storage without suspicion. The operation suggested planning that extended over months, if not years, and a knowledge of legal loopholes that enabled concealment of illicit activity. Authorities faced enormous pressure to act decisively. The public demanded transparency, politicians demanded accountability, and criminal elements, perhaps aware of the raid, reportedly went quiet, creating a tense calm across Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Analysts noted that such silence is rarely coincidental. It is often the sign of networks assessing risk, recalculating strategies, and preparing for the next move. This was not just a seizure, it was a message. Legal experts weighed in on the potential charges. Possession of unregistered firearms carries significant penalties, but when linked to alleged criminal networks, the stakes rise dramatically. Prosecutors began building cases that could tie the firearms to prior violent incidents, thefts, and even politically motivated attacks. The challenge lay in proving direct ownership. Matlala's denials, coupled with the property being registered to Mamkai's, created a legal labyrinth that would test the ingenuity of investigators and lawyers alike. The narrative of power and secrecy only deepened when journalists investigated Matlala's background. Known for his flamboyant lifestyle, connections to high-ranking officials, and involvement in controversial incidents, Matlala appeared untouchable for years. Yet the raid exposed a vulnerability. Even the most influential figures could have shadows exposed, and public perception shifted overnight. Social media exploded with discussions, memes, and heated debates about corruption, influence, and the dangerous intertwining of wealth and violence. Meanwhile, forensic teams meticulously examined the firearms. Serial numbers, fingerprints, traces of recent usage, and modifications were all documented. The goal was to map each weapon to prior crimes and to establish a timeline that could prove both possession and intent. Experts emphasized that this process was painstaking. A single error could compromise a case that already rested on shaky legal ground. Every detail mattered, from the dust on a gun grip to the scratches on a magazine. The political implications were unavoidable. Mamkai's, as a well-known public figure, became a focal point for criticism. Opposition parties and activists used the case to argue that power and influence can shield criminal activity. Whether Mamkai's was directly involved or merely the custodian of Matlala's arsenal became secondary to the broader narrative, that the lines between wealth, status, and the law are dangerously blurred. Community reactions varied. In townships and neighborhoods across Gauteng, residents expressed fear and disbelief. How could so many firearms be stored in a single estate without anyone noticing? What does it say about safety, oversight, and the reach of organized crime? These questions fuel tension, as ordinary citizens imagined the consequences if such weapons were unleashed. Parents spoke of children playing near gated estates, police officers braced for potential retaliation, and journalists warned of the broader implications for national security. In private, intelligence analysts cautioned that this seizure might be only the tip of the iceberg. Connections hinted at smuggling routes, safe houses, and additional operatives across the country. Every interview, surveillance tape, and financial record began to reveal a network whose complexity rivaled the country's most notorious criminal operations. Matlala's involvement suggested that the network was not only operationally effective but also strategically insulated from casual detection, making it far more dangerous than the simple discovery of firearms suggested. Meanwhile, Matlala's public image continued to fracture. Social media campaigns portrayed him as a criminal mastermind, while traditional media emphasized the legal ambiguities that complicated prosecution. Public sentiment was increasingly hostile, yet many remained intrigued, treating the unfolding events like a real-life thriller. This mix of fear and fascination amplified scrutiny on the police, prosecutors, and political figures, who were all caught in the glare of public expectation. As Block 2 closes, the stakes are unmistakable. 40 firearms linked to Kat Matlala have transformed a single estate raid into a national scandal. The implications extend beyond the individual, exposing the hidden intersections of wealth, influence, and criminal enterprise. For authorities, the challenge is clear: trace, prove, and prosecute while maintaining public trust. For the public, the revelation is a stark warning of how easily violence can hide behind the veneer of respectability. And for Kat Matlala, the fallout is just beginning. An unraveling story that will define his legacy and test South Africa's justice system like never before. The focus now shifted from the discovery itself to the network behind the firearms, a network that investigators quickly dubbed the Mkhwanazi Network. Initial findings suggested that the 40 weapons were only a small fraction of the arsenal controlled by Kat Matlala and his associates. The sophistication of the operation was staggering: encrypted communications, front businesses for logistics, and a system of couriers capable of moving firearms without attracting attention. Law enforcement began to realize that this was not a random stockpile, but the nerve center of a highly organized criminal enterprise. Every lead unraveled a complex web of connections. Matlala, already notorious in the public eye, had long-standing ties to individuals involved in previous assassinations, kidnappings, and politically motivated attacks. Investigators traced payments, phone records, and travel logs, each revealing meticulous planning and coordination. It became increasingly clear that the firearms at Mamkai's estate were intended not merely for protection, but for active deployment in violent operations that could destabilize regions if left unchecked. The methods of concealment were as ingenious as they were alarming. False walls, hidden compartments, and custom storage units ensured that the firearms remained invisible to casual visitors. Surveillance footage indicated that certain individuals were granted access only at specific times, and that even trusted household staff were kept unaware of the full extent of the cache. This level of secrecy suggested both operational sophistication and an acute awareness of the risk posed by discovery. Forensic analysis revealed alarming details. Many of the firearms had been modified for rapid firing, some traced to prior criminal incidents across the country. Serial numbers were tampered with, and ballistics reports suggested that several weapons had been recently discharged. Each revelation added urgency to the investigation. These were not idle collector's items. They were weapons of action, ready to be deployed at any moment. Meanwhile, public fascination and fear reached new heights. Social media forums lit up with speculation. How many other estates in South Africa were harboring similar arsenals? What crimes had already been committed with these firearms? Could there be collusion at higher levels of law enforcement or government? The combination of wealth, secrecy, and deadly power created an almost cinematic narrative, yet beneath the drama lay a tangible threat to public safety. Kat Matlala's profile as a central figure became unavoidable. Known for his charisma, connections, and controversial past, he had navigated public attention for years. But the Mkhwanazi raid changed the perception entirely. Previously untouchable, he was now publicly linked to one of the largest and most dangerous illegal arms networks in modern South African history. The optics alone were staggering. a man with access to wealth and influence capable of secretly controlling a stockpile that could arm dozens of operatives. Authorities worked quickly to establish legal ownership and intent. While Mamkai's property was officially registered under his name, investigators pursued evidence linking Matlala directly to the firearms. Witness statements, financial records, and intercepted communications painted a picture of control that was difficult to dispute. Each new piece of evidence reinforced the narrative of a coordinated criminal enterprise, strengthening the case against Matlala and any accomplices. The political ramifications were also immediate. South Africa's opposition parties seized upon the story, highlighting systemic weaknesses in law enforcement oversight. Critics argued that figures like Matlala exploit social and political connections to evade accountability. Public discourse quickly turned toward questions about corruption, influence, and the dangers of allowing wealthy individuals to operate above the law. Every public statement, every press release, became a test of credibility for authorities caught in the glare of public scrutiny. Inside the police operation, there were tense moments. The scope of the network suggested that Matlala had associates embedded in multiple provinces. Any misstep could alert operatives to the investigation, risking the destruction of evidence or even retaliation. Teams were deployed carefully, balancing aggressive investigation with the safety of officers and the community. Analysts noted that one wrong move could ignite a wave of violence, underscoring the seriousness of the operation. In the media, the story was framed as both a thriller and a warning. Headlines emphasized the scale: 40 firearms, secret compartments, modifications for rapid fire. But investigative journalism highlighted the broader implications. The Mkhwanazi network was likely only partially exposed. Authorities feared that more caches remained hidden, that more operatives were still active, and that the network's reach could extend into political and business spheres. The discovery at Mamkai's estate was a beginning, not an end. As Block 3 closes, the picture is clear. The firearms are merely a symbol of something much larger. They represent power, secrecy, and the ability of a single individual to influence criminal activity across the country. The stakes are high, not just legally, but socially and politically. Kat Matlala has become a figure who embodies the intersections of wealth, violence, and corruption, while the Mkhwanazi network looms as an ongoing threat, demanding vigilance, transparency, and decisive action from law enforcement. The discovery of 40 firearms in Mamkai's estate was not just a criminal case, it became a national flashpoint, raising questions about security, governance, and the influence of powerful figures. Across South Africa, the story dominated headlines, social media feeds, and public discourse. For many citizens, the image of a private estate housing such an arsenal was both terrifying and surreal. It suggested that violence could be orchestrated from behind luxury gates, hidden rooms, and polished facades, entirely outside the reach of ordinary law enforcement. Authorities, aware of the social implications, stressed that the operation was ongoing. Investigators coordinated with multiple agencies, from local police units to national intelligence, to trace links between the firearms and reported criminal activities. Each recovered weapon was a potential key to solving prior crimes, robberies, attempted assassinations, and gang-related murders. Experts cautioned that any delay or error could allow operatives to reorganize, destroy evidence, or flee, creating a race against time that added tension and urgency to the operation. Political ramifications intensified as opposition leaders criticized the government for failing to monitor individuals with vast wealth and influence. Public debates questioned how someone like Kat Matlala could accumulate such a dangerous stockpile without detection. Was this a failure of oversight, corruption within enforcement agencies, or a calculated effort to operate above the law? Each scenario painted a grim picture of systemic vulnerability, raising questions about the boundaries between legal authority and private power. Community reactions were immediate and emotional. In neighborhoods surrounding Mamkai's estate, residents expressed both fear and outrage. Parents worried about the potential for violence, while youth speculated about the reach of criminal networks and the potential involvement of political or business figures. Town halls, community forums, and online discussions were filled with debates about accountability, vigilance, and the consequences of inaction. The story became a mirror reflecting deep social anxieties. Wealth, secrecy, and violence intertwined in ways the public could hardly comprehend. Kat Matlala's reputation, once controversial but tolerable, now faced unprecedented scrutiny. Media outlets analyzed his connections, his previous encounters with law enforcement, and his rumored involvement in other violent networks. Analysts argued that the discovery at Mamkai's estate revealed more than just hidden firearms. It exposed a pattern of influence, intimidation, and strategic planning that could destabilize regions if left unchecked. Matlala's public image transformed overnight, from an enigmatic figure with murky ties to a symbol of organized criminal power operating in plain sight. The narrative extended beyond crime and politics into cultural commentary. Journalists and commentators highlighted the psychological impact of the discovery. Ordinary citizens could see, for the first time, that influence, wealth, and secrecy can conceal deadly power. It became a story of vulnerability and fear, one that transcended legal analysis to touch the collective consciousness. Social media amplified these perceptions, with hashtags, viral videos, and debates connecting Matlala's arsenal to broader concerns about law enforcement capability and social stability. For law enforcement, the stakes were not merely legal, they were strategic. Operations had to proceed carefully to avoid tipping off the network. Officers worked to map out potential accomplices, tracking movements, monitoring communications, and surveilling suspected meeting points. Analysts stressed that any misstep could trigger violence or the relocation of additional firearms, making every decision a delicate balance between assertiveness and caution. The forensic investigation continued to reveal alarming details. Many firearms had been modified to enhance firepower, serial numbers were deliberately erased, and traces of prior usage linked several weapons to unsolved crimes. The findings suggested that the network was active, operational, and potentially planning further acts of violence. For investigators, each gun was not just evidence, it was a warning. Each trace of usage represented a criminal episode that might have gone unnoticed, raising questions about how many crimes had been enabled by the secrecy of Mamkai's estate. Political actors also exploited the narrative. Opposition figures used the discovery to critique government oversight, while ruling party officials emphasized that the investigation was ongoing and that no conclusions should be drawn prematurely. Analysts noted that these dynamics added a layer of complexity. Public pressure was mounting for immediate action, yet any rash decisions could jeopardize prosecution or public safety. The operation had become both a legal challenge and a political minefield. At the community level, discussions reflected a mix of fascination, anger, and fear. Citizens debated the morality of power, the safety of their neighborhoods, and the potential for retaliation. Rumors of additional weapons caches spread, fueling speculation and anxiety. Local activists called for greater transparency, demanding accountability not just from Matlala but from the systems that allowed such an operation to remain hidden for so long. The story became emblematic of the tension between private influence and public security, illustrating how a single discovery could resonate across societal layers. As Block 4 closes, the implications of Operation Quanatsi become clear. The discovery of 40 firearms tied to Kat Matlala is not an isolated incident. It is a window into a network capable of large-scale coordination, secrecy, and potential violence. The story illustrates the intersection of wealth, power, and criminal enterprise, revealing vulnerabilities in governance, law enforcement, and public safety. For South Africa, the case serves as both warning and call to action. Transparency, vigilance, and accountability are essential in preventing the shadows of power from becoming instruments of chaos. As the investigation into Kat Matlala and the Mkhwanatsi network progressed, it became clear that the discovery of 40 firearms in Mamkai's estate was only the beginning of a far-reaching story. The implications stretched beyond the mere presence of weapons. They revealed an intricate web of influence, secrecy, and potential violence that permeated South Africa's social, political, and criminal spheres. Every day brought new revelations, each more alarming than the last. Legal proceedings were complex from the outset. Prosecutors faced the challenge of proving direct ownership and intent. While the firearms were physically located on Mamkai's property, forensic evidence, financial records, and communications linked them to Kat Matlala. Establishing a timeline of possession and tracing the potential use of the weapons became a priority. Legal experts warned that the sophistication of the network made prosecution difficult. Any oversight could result in dismissal or delay, prolonging the public's uncertainty and feeding the narrative of untouchable criminal power. Meanwhile, public reactions intensified. Across South Africa, citizens debated the implications of a private arsenal so easily concealed. Social media became a forum for speculation, with theories ranging from organized crime operations to politically motivated intimidation campaigns. For ordinary South Africans, The story was terrifying. If 40 weapons could remain hidden in a wealthy estate, what else might be concealed in other properties, under the radar of law enforcement? The sense of vulnerability grew, blending fear with fascination as the narrative unfolded. Political consequences were inevitable. Opposition parties seized the story as evidence of systemic failure, highlighting weaknesses in oversight and accountability. Public pressure mounted on law enforcement and government agencies to ensure transparency, efficiency, and decisive action. Meanwhile, supporters of the government emphasized the ongoing nature of the investigation, cautioning against premature conclusions. The tension between public expectation and operational security created a delicate balance, where any misstep could escalate the crisis further. For Kat Matlala, the discovery transformed his public image entirely. Once a controversial figure operating in the shadows of influence, he now symbolized the danger of wealth used to conceal power and violence. Analysts highlighted his connections to multiple criminal operations, suggesting that the weapons were not for personal use but part of a broader, coordinated network capable of orchestrating acts of intimidation, enforcement, or retaliation. The narrative cast him simultaneously as a criminal mastermind and a symbol of systemic failure. The social impact extended into communities across Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Local residents expressed fear and outrage, realizing that criminal operations could operate openly under the cover of wealth and privilege. Neighborhoods became hyper-aware of security risks, while youth speculated on the reach of the network and its potential consequences. The discovery also sparked debates about inequality and corruption, with citizens questioning how social, economic, and political influence could be leveraged to evade detection and manipulate outcomes. Forensic investigation continued at a painstaking pace. Each firearm was catalogued, tested, and traced to prior incidents where possible. Modifications to weapons indicated readiness for rapid deployment, while fingerprints and DNA analysis attempted to establish links to known operatives. Every detail, from the positioning of firearms to the patterns of usage, contributed to a larger picture of an organized and strategic criminal enterprise. Analysts cautioned that delays could compromise evidence, allowing operatives to adapt or flee, making the work of law enforcement both urgent and perilous. The political and cultural ramifications of the Mkhwanatsi raid also became more pronounced. Media coverage emphasized not only the criminal aspect but also the psychological and societal impact. Citizens were reminded that violence, influence, and secrecy can coexist behind wealth and status. Public discourse questioned the accountability of those in power, from business magnates to political figures, and the consequences of allowing criminal networks to operate unchecked. In effect, the firearms became symbols of vulnerability, corruption, and the persistent threat posed by clandestine networks. As the case developed, the name Kat Matlala became synonymous with fear, mystery, and intrigue. Investigators, journalists, and the public alike treated him as a figure whose influence extended far beyond a single estate. The network he allegedly commanded was active, adaptive, and capable of concealing operations under layers of secrecy and deception. Each day that the case unfolded reinforced his reputation as a central figure in a story that combined wealth, power, and danger. By the final stages of investigation, the narrative reached a critical juncture. Authorities had recovered the weapons, traced several potential crimes, and identified key associates. Yet, the broader network remained elusive. Analysts warned that without sustained vigilance, additional caches or operatives could evade detection. The story was no longer just about a raid. It was about the fragile boundary between law and lawlessness, and the consequences when that boundary is blurred by influence and secrecy. For the public, the lesson was stark. Even in a modern, ostensibly regulated society, networks of power and violence can operate in plain sight. The 40 firearms were tangible proof, but the invisible connections, the logistical sophistication, and the political and social reach of the network represented an even greater threat. Citizens watched, fearful yet captivated, as each new detail emerged, aware that the story of Mamkai's estate and Kat Matlala was emblematic of larger societal vulnerabilities. As Block 5 closes, the Mkhwanatsi case stands as a cautionary tale. 40 firearms hidden in a single estate reveal far more than criminal possession. They reveal the intersection of wealth, influence, and violence. Kat Matlala has emerged as a symbol of the dangers that arise when power is unregulated and secrecy is maintained at the expense of public safety. The investigation, while ongoing, has already reshaped public perception, legal discourse, and national awareness of how networks of crime can hide in plain sight. The final question lingers, echoing in the minds of citizens, journalists, and officials alike. How many more estates conceal weapons of similar scale? How far does the network extend? And most importantly, can justice, accountability, and transparency truly prevail when those with influence appear capable of operating beyond consequence? For South Africa, the answers are uncertain. But the story of Mamkai's, Matlala, and the Mkhwanazi network has already left an indelible mark, a dark reflection of how power, secrecy, and violence intersect, and a chilling reminder that even in modern society, danger can be lurking behind the most unsuspecting facades.